The crimson rain fell like tears from a bleeding sky, each drop striking the execution platform with the finality of a death knell. Marcus Vale knelt in the mud alongside 23 other condemned souls, his wrists raw beneath the energy shackles that hummed with lethal potential. The collar around his neck felt heavier with each passing moment, a reminder that his life now measured in heartbeats rather than years. 3 days ago, he had been distributing medical supplies to the underground settlements beneath Xerian's surface. Now he faced execution for the crime of compassion, providing aid to those the planetary government deemed undesirable. The irony wasn't lost on him that his medical training, meant to save lives, had led him to this moment of reckoning. "Beautiful day for dying," muttered the woman beside him, a smuggler named Vera whose weathered face bore the marks of a lifetime spent in the galaxy's shadows. Her voice carried the bitter humor of someone who had always known this day would come. Marcus remained silent, his eyes scanning the crowd of onlookers gathered in the execution plaza. Most were locals, drawn by the spectacle of justice being served. But elevated above the masses on a crystalline platform stood the true audience, the Celestial Diplomatic Corps, here to witness Xerian's commitment to law and order. Among the diplomats, one figure caught his attention. She stood apart from the others, her ethereal beauty stark against the storm-darkened sky. Her skin shimmered with an opalescent quality that seemed to capture and reflect the dying light, while delicate crystalline formations traced elegant patterns along her temples and collar. 2 smaller figures huddled close to her, children, seeking shelter from the rain beneath her protective embrace. The execution herald stepped forward, his voice amplified by sonic projectors that cut through the storm's fury. "By order of the Xerian Planetary Council, the condemned stand guilty of violations against the Colonial Security Act. Their crimes include unauthorized distribution of medical supplies, conspiracy to aid forbidden populations, and seditious acts against lawful authority." Marcus closed his eyes, remembering the faces of those he had helped. The underground dwellers were refugees from a dozen different worlds, people who had fled war, poverty, and persecution only to find themselves trapped in Xerian's subterranean slums. They had nothing, no legal status, no access to medical care, no hope. Until Marcus and others like him had chosen to help. "The sentence is death by neural dissolution," the herald continued. "To be carried out immediately." The executioner's platform hummed to life, its energy fields beginning to charge. Marcus felt the familiar calm that had always come to him in moments of crisis, the same serenity that had guided his hands during countless medical procedures. If this was how his story ended, at least he had made a difference. That's when the small voice cut through the rain and the herald's droning proclamation. "Mama, that's him. That's the man who saved me." Every head in the plaza turned toward the sound. One of the children on the diplomatic platform, a girl who couldn't have been more than 7 standard years old, was pointing directly at Marcus. Her small finger remained steady despite the storm, unwavering in its accusation of heroism. The herald stopped mid-sentence, confusion rippling through the crowd like a shock wave. Marcus stared up at the child, memory flooding back with crystal clarity. 4 days ago, before his arrest, he had been in the market district when a support beam collapsed during a construction accident. He had spent hours pulling survivors from the wreckage, including a terrified little girl with the same opalescent skin and crystalline markings. He had carried her to safety through the chaos, ensuring she reached the medical station before disappearing into the crowd. He had thought no one would remember one more act of kindness in a galaxy that seemed determined to punish such gestures. The elegant woman, clearly the child's mother, stepped forward to the platform's edge. Even from this distance, Marcus could see the conflict playing across her features. Her composed diplomatic mask was cracking, revealing something far more human underneath. "I invoke the diplomatic sanctuary clause under the Galactic Accords," her voice rang across the plaza, cutting through the rain like a blade. "This human is now under my personal protection as a material witness to acts of heroism during the Market District incident." The herald's jaw dropped. Magistrate Korvax, a thick-set reptilian whose scales glistened with rainwater, stepped forward with obvious displeasure. "Ambassador Zara, with respect, this is highly irregular." These prisoners have been lawfully sentenced under Xerian jurisdiction. And I am invoking my diplomatic prerogatives under interplanetary law, Zara replied, her chin raised defiantly. Unless Xerian wishes to face sanctions from the Diplomatic Council for violating established treaties. Marcus watched this exchange with growing amazement. This woman, this Ambassador Zara, was putting her entire career on the line for a stranger. In his experience, politicians rarely risked their positions for anything, let alone someone they had never met. Korvax's reptilian features twisted with frustration. Very well. But understand, Ambassador, you assume full responsibility for this human's conduct. Any crimes he commits, any diplomatic incidents he causes, fall upon your shoulders. Are you prepared for such a burden? Zara's gaze found Marcus across the plaza. Something electric passed between them, recognition, gratitude, and something deeper that made his pulse quicken despite the circumstances. Her eyes held depths he had never seen before, ancient wisdom combined with fierce determination. I am, she said simply. The next hour passed in a blur of bureaucratic procedures. Marcus found himself released from the energy shackles, processed through Xerian's diplomatic channels, and officially transferred to Zara's custody. The other prisoners weren't so fortunate, their executions proceeded as scheduled, a grim reminder of how close he had come to joining them. As the sun set through the storm clouds, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Marcus stood in the luxurious diplomatic suite that would be his sanctuary. The contrast couldn't have been starker, from a muddy execution ground to elegant accommodations with actual warmth and the promise of a future he had never expected. Through the transparent steel windows, he could see Xerian's sprawling cityscape, its lights beginning to twinkle like stars. But his attention was drawn to the woman who had saved him, now changed from her formal diplomatic robes into something more casual, a flowing garment that seemed to capture and reflect light like liquid starlight. The children are with their tutor, Zara said, entering the main room. We can speak freely now. Marcus turned to face her fully, still struggling to process his reversal of fortune. I don't know how to thank you. You risked everything for someone you barely know. In my culture, such debts are not taken lightly, she replied, settling gracefully onto a crystalline chair that seemed to mold itself to her form. You saved my daughter's life. In return, I have claimed responsibility for yours. The weight of her words settled between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Marcus found himself studying the elegant curve of her neck, the way her crystalline markings seemed to pulse with inner light. She was beautiful in a way that transcended species, a living work of art that spoke to something deep in his soul. What exactly does that mean? He asked quietly. Zara's expression grew thoughtful, her large eyes reflecting the soft ambient lighting. That depends entirely on what you choose to make of this second chance, Marcus Vale. Your life is no longer your own, it belongs to the future we might build together. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to clear, revealing the first stars of evening. Inside their private sanctuary, two beings from different worlds stood on the threshold of something neither had anticipated, a connection that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, sacrifice, and the courage to reach across the vast darkness between stars. Zara Nethys had lived 3 centuries, witnessed the rise and fall of star systems, and negotiated treaties that shaped the destiny of entire civilizations. Yet as she watched Marcus Vale examine the intricate crystalline formations that served as both art and communication devices in her quarters, she felt something she had never experienced before, the flutter of nervous anticipation that had nothing to do with diplomatic protocol. These are beautiful, Marcus said, his fingers hovering just above the surface of a resonance crystal. Do they serve a practical purpose? They're memory vessels, Zara explained, moving closer to him. Each one contains the experiences, emotions, and knowledge of my ancestors. When touched by someone with the proper neural patterns, they share their contents. Marcus pulled his hand back quickly. I don't want to damage anything important. You couldn't, she said softly. Only those of my bloodline can activate them. But the fact that you asked permission first. She trailed off, her crystalline markings shifting to a warmer hue. In my culture, such consideration is highly valued. The past week had been a revelation. Marcus had adapted to life in the diplomatic quarters with surprising ease, helping with Naya's education while learning about celestial customs and traditions. More importantly, he had shown genuine interest in understanding her people's ways rather than simply tolerating them. Mama! Naya's voice echoed from the adjoining chamber. Marcus promised to tell us about Earth music today. Zara smiled, her heart warming at her daughter's enthusiasm. Since Marcus's arrival, Naya had been more animated than she had been in months. The child had taken to following him around the quarters, peppering him with questions about human culture and hanging on his every word. Earth music, Zara mused as they walked toward Naya's study area. I confess, I know very little about human artistic expression. Then you're in for a treat, Marcus replied with a grin that made her pulse quicken. Though I should warn you, my singing voice could probably be classified as a diplomatic incident. They found Naya and her younger brother Oren waiting eagerly, their homework abandoned in favor of this more interesting lesson. Marcus settled cross-legged on the floor between them, and Zara felt her breath catch at the natural ease with which he interacted with her children. Music on Earth comes in countless forms, Marcus began, his voice taking on the patient tone of a natural teacher. Some is created with instruments, devices that produce sound when touched or blown into. Others use only the human voice. Show us. Oren demanded, his crystalline markings flickering with excitement. Marcus glanced at Zara, who nodded encouragingly despite her own curiosity. He began to hum, a low, melodious sound that seemed to resonate through the crystalline structures around them. The memory vessels began to glow softly, responding to the unfamiliar vibrations. That's impossible, Zara whispered, staring at the activated crystals. Only celestial neural patterns should affect them. Marcus stopped humming abruptly. Did I break something? No, you. Zara moved closer to examine the crystals, her scientific mind racing to understand what she was witnessing. You activated them. That should be impossible for a human. The implications were staggering. For millennia, the Celestials had believed their neural patterns were unique, incompatible with other species. Yet Marcus had somehow resonated with their ancestral memories using nothing but his voice. Perhaps there's more connection between our species than we realized, she said thoughtfully. That evening, after the children had been put to bed, Zara found herself alone with Marcus on the quarter's observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly above them, and she was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the warmth radiating from his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way he seemed to study the cosmos with the same intensity she had once reserved for diplomatic treaties. Tell me about your world, she said quietly. Your real world, not the sanitized version in the diplomatic databases. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Earth is complicated. Beautiful and terrible in equal measure. We have oceans that stretch beyond the horizon and mountains that touch the sky. But we also have poverty, war, and people who turn away from suffering because it's easier than helping. Yet you chose to help, Zara observed. Even when it meant risking everything. My mother was a medic during the colony wars, Marcus explained. She used to say that healing wasn't just about mending bodies, it was about mending the spaces between people. Building bridges where there were only walls. Zara felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the artificial climate controls. She sounds wise. She was. She would have liked you, I think. She always said the best people were the ones who chose to act when action was needed, regardless of the consequences. Like invoking diplomatic sanctuary for a condemned criminal? Zara asked with a slight smile. Marcus turned to face her fully, and in the starlight, she could see something intense burning in his eyes. You saved my life, Zara. But more than that, you showed me that there are still people willing to risk everything for what's right. In my experience, that's rarer than stardust. The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with an energy that made her crystalline markings pulse with warmth. Marcus, she began, but he reached out to gently touch one of the formations along her temple. "Are these sensitive?" he asked softly. The contact sent shock waves through her nervous system. "Yes," she gasped. "Very. Among my people, touching another's markings is considered intimate. Should I stop?" Instead of answering, she leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed as sensations she had never experienced cascaded through her consciousness. His fingers were rough from years of medical work, yet gentle as they traced the crystalline patterns that mapped her heritage and lineage. "Zara," he whispered, and she opened her eyes to find his face inches from hers. When their lips met, it was like the collision of two galaxies, violent and beautiful and utterly transformative. She tasted the salt of human tears and the sweetness of hope, while he discovered that celestials tasted like starlight and ancient wisdom. Her markings blazed with light, responding to emotions she had never allowed herself to feel. In her culture, relationships were carefully arranged, politically advantageous unions designed to strengthen bloodlines and secure alliances. The concept of choosing a partner based on desire, on the wild beating of one's heart, was foreign and intoxicating. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "This is madness," she whispered against his lips. "The best kind," Marcus replied, his thumb tracing the edge of her jaw where new crystalline formations were beginning to emerge, a sign, according to celestial physiology, of deep emotional bonding. "My people will never understand," she said, even as she pressed closer to him. "An ambassador, unmarried, choosing an alien." "Then don't choose the ambassador," Marcus interrupted gently. "Choose the woman. Choose Zara, who saved a stranger's life because her daughter asked her to. Choose the mother who lights up when her children laugh. Choose the person who activated ancient crystals with nothing but a song." Tears gathered in her large eyes, another human trait she seemed to be developing. "You make it sound simple." "Love is simple," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "It's everything else that's complicated." As if summoned by his words, her quarter's communication system chimed with an incoming priority message. Zara reluctantly moved away from Marcus to answer it, her heart sinking as she recognized the sender, Ambassador Korath, the head of the celestial delegation. "Zara," Koratha's stern image appeared in the holographic display. "We need to discuss your recent decisions. The Council has concerns about your judgment regarding the human prisoner." "He's under my protection," Zara replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Indeed. And that protection is raising questions about your fitness for this mission. I'll be visiting your quarters tomorrow morning to conduct a formal review. I trust you'll ensure your guest behaves appropriately." The connection terminated, leaving Marcus and Zara alone with the weight of impending consequences. She turned back to him, seeing her own fears reflected in his eyes. "Tomorrow changes everything," she said quietly. Marcus stood and moved to her, pulling her into his arms despite the uncertain future bearing down on them. "Then let's make tonight count." As Zirion's twin moons rose over the diplomatic quarter, casting silver light through the crystalline walls, two beings from different worlds discovered that some connections transcended species, culture, and the vast darkness between stars. In the sanctuary of her quarters, surrounded by the memories of her ancestors and the promise of an impossible future, Zara Nethys chose love over duty for the first time in her 3-century life. Tomorrow would bring judgment, consequences, and the full weight of interstellar politics. But tonight belonged to them alone, written in starlight and sealed with the kind of passion that could reshape the galaxy itself. Naya Nethys pressed her small face against the transparent steel wall of the observation deck, watching her mother pace anxiously in the main chamber below. At 7 years old, she possessed the keen intuition that often came with youth, and she could sense the tension crackling through their quarters like an electrical storm. "Mama's scared," she whispered to her younger brother Oren, who was busy arranging his collection of memory crystals in complex patterns on the floor. "About the mean ambassador coming?" Oren asked without looking up from his work. Naya nodded gravely. Ambassador Korath had always made her uncomfortable with his cold eyes and disapproving frown. He looked at Mama the way the market vendors looked at overripe fruit, like something that had gone bad and needed to be discarded. But Marcus will protect her, Naya said with the absolute certainty that only children possessed. He protected me when the building fell down. The memory of that terrifying day still visited her dreams sometimes. The crushing weight of debris, the darkness, the fear that she would never see her family again. Then Marcus had appeared like a hero from the old stories, digging through the rubble with his bare hands until he found her. He had carried her to safety, speaking to her in gentle tones even though she could see the blood on his hands and the exhaustion in his eyes. "I like Marcus," Oren announced, holding up a crystal that pulsed with warm golden light. "He doesn't talk to us like we're stupid." Naya smiled at her brother's simple wisdom. Most adults spoke to them in that sing-song voice reserved for children, as if being young automatically made them incapable of understanding complex ideas. But Marcus treated them like real people, answering their questions honestly and listening to their thoughts with genuine interest. "I have an idea," Naya said, her crystalline markings beginning to shimmer with excitement. "But we have to be sneaky about it." An hour later, when Ambassador Korath arrived with his usual entourage of disapproving diplomats, Naya put her plan into action. She had positioned herself and Oren strategically in the main chamber, appearing to be innocently studying while the adults conducted their serious business. "Ambassador Zara," Korath began in his pompous voice, "the council has expressed serious concerns about your attachment to this human." Naya watched her mother's markings darken with stress. "Marcus is under my protection as per diplomatic protocols." "Protocols that were designed for temporary situations," Korath replied coldly. "Not for, whatever this has become." Marcus stood quietly near the window, his jaw clenched but his expression carefully neutral. Naya could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands flexed at his sides as if he wanted to defend her mother but knew he couldn't interfere. That's when Naya made her move. "Ambassador Korath," she said in her sweetest voice, rising from her study cushion. "Would you like to hear about what Marcus taught us yesterday?" The elderly Celestial's multiple eyes fixed on her with obvious irritation. "Children should not interrupt adult conversations." "But it's about cultural exchange," Naya continued innocently. "Mama always says that understanding other species makes us better diplomats." Zara shot her daughter a warning look, but Naya was already in motion. She walked over to Marcus, who looked down at her with surprise and growing concern. "Marcus, show them the Earth greeting," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Naya, I don't think. Please." She gave him her most persuasive smile, the one that usually worked on her mother when she wanted extra dessert. Marcus glanced at Zara, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. But something in Naya's expression must have convinced him, because he knelt down to her level and extended his hand. "On Earth," he said quietly, "friends greet each other by shaking hands. It's a sign of respect and trust." Naya took his hand solemnly, noting how warm and solid it felt compared to the cool touch of her own people. "And friends protect each other, right?" "Always," Marcus replied, his voice gentle but firm. "Like how you protected me when the building fell down." "Like that, yes." Naya turned to face the assembled diplomats, her small hand still clasped in Marcus's much larger one. "This is what friendship looks like. This is what protection looks like. Marcus saved my life, and now Mama is saving his. That's what good people do." The silence that followed was deafening. Ambassador Koratha's expression had shifted from annoyance to something approaching shock, while the other diplomats exchanged uncertain glances. And Oren piped up from his position on the floor, "Marcus makes Mama smile. She's been sad for a long time, but now she lights up like a memory crystal when he's around." If Naya thought the silence had been uncomfortable before, now it was positively arctic. Her mother's markings had gone completely dark with embarrassment, while Marcus looked like he wanted to find the nearest airlock. But Naya wasn't finished. At 7 years old, she possessed the fearless honesty that adults had trained out of themselves through years of political correctness and social expectations. "Don't you want Mama to be happy?" she asked Korath directly. "Don't you want her to have someone who cares about her and us?" The old ambassador's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. "Child, you don't understand the complexities of interspecies relations." "I understand that Marcus risked his life to save strangers," Naya replied with the devastating logic of youth. "I understand that he's teaching us about his world while learning about ours. I understand that he makes Mama laugh for the first time since Papa died." "What's complex about that?" The mention of her father sent a ripple of discomfort through the room. Zara's previous mate had died in a transport accident 3 years ago, leaving her to raise 2 children alone while maintaining her demanding diplomatic career. The council had been pressuring her to accept a new arranged marriage, but she had resisted, claiming she needed time to grieve. Furthermore, Naya continued, building momentum like a tiny hurricane, "Marcus helped me with my quantum mathematics yesterday. He understood concepts that most adults find difficult. He's not just some primitive human, he's smart and kind and brave." She paused, looking around the room at the uncomfortable faces of the diplomats. "And if you can't see that, then maybe you're not as wise as you think you are." The collective gasp from the assembled diplomats was audible. Children simply did not speak to their elders this way, especially not to high-ranking officials. But before anyone could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "The child speaks truth." Everyone turned to see Elder Thorn entering the chamber, her ancient form moving with the careful grace of someone who had lived through countless centuries. As one of the most respected members of the Celestial Council, her presence commanded immediate attention and reverence. "Elder Thorn," Korath began, clearly flustered by this unexpected development. "I wasn't aware you were coming." "I go where wisdom is needed," the ancient Celestial replied, her eyes fixed on Naya with something approaching approval. "And it seems I have found it in the most unexpected place." Thorn moved closer to Marcus, studying him with the intensity of someone who had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. "So you are the human who has caused such discussion among the council." "I am," Marcus replied simply, meeting her gaze without flinching. "And you saved this child's life?" "I helped during an emergency." "Anyone would have done the same." Thorn's markings shifted to a warmer hue. "No, young human. Not anyone. Most would have calculated the risk, weighed the potential consequences, considered the political implications. You simply acted because action was needed." She turned to address the assembled diplomats. "Perhaps we have forgotten, in our centuries of careful protocol and measured responses, what it means to act with pure intention. This human has reminded us that sometimes the greatest wisdom lies not in calculation, but in compassion." Naya felt a surge of triumph. Elder Thorn understood. She was taking their side. "Elder," Korath said carefully, "surely you're not suggesting that we ignore the impropriety of Ambassador Zara's situation?" "I'm suggesting," Thorn replied with steel in her voice, "that we examine our own biases before passing judgment on others. This human has shown more diplomatic wisdom in a few weeks than some of our career ambassadors display in decades." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different, less hostile, more contemplative. Naya could see the wheels turning in the adults' minds as they processed Thorn's words. However, Thorn continued, "The Council's concerns about protocol must be addressed. Ambassador Zara, you will return to the homeworld for a formal review of your actions." Naya's heart sank. Going home meant leaving Marcus behind, and she could see the same realization dawning on her mother's face. "But," Thorn added with a slight smile, "your cultural consultant will accompany you. After all, how can we properly evaluate interspecies relations without both species present?" The hope that blazed in her mother's markings was matched only by the relief on Marcus's face. They would be together, at least for now. As the diplomats filed out of the chamber, their expressions ranging from confusion to grudging acceptance, Naya felt a small hand slip into hers. Oren looked up at her with admiration. "You did it," he whispered. "You helped them." Naya smiled, watching as Marcus and their mother stood close together, speaking in low voices about the journey ahead. "That's what families do," she said simply. "They help each other." Later that evening, as the stars wheeled overhead and the family prepared for the long journey to the celestial homeworld, Naya sat in her favorite spot on the observation deck. Marcus found her there, looking thoughtful despite the victory of the day. "Credits for your thoughts," he said, settling beside her. "Do you think they'll let you stay?" she asked quietly. "The council, I mean. Do you think they'll understand?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, Naya. But I promise you this, whatever happens, I'll never forget what you did today. You stood up for what you believed in, even when it was scary. That takes real courage." Naya leaned against his shoulder, feeling safe and protected. "I just want Mama to be happy. And I want us to stay together." "So do I," Marcus said softly. "So do I." As the transport ship prepared for departure the next morning, carrying them toward an uncertain future among the crystal spires of the celestial homeworld, Naya clutched her mother's hand and looked back at Marcus with absolute faith. She had already changed the course of history once by pointing him out in the execution plaza. Now she was ready to do it again, armed with nothing but the unshakable conviction that love could conquer any obstacle, even the vast bureaucracy of interstellar politics. The stars awaited them, and with them, the next chapter of their impossible story.